I was able to keep up with the Marvel Netflix stuff up until about halfway into Defenders, at which point I accidentally lost track of time, and before I knew it, the Marvel Netflix stuff was all cancelled. So I went back to the beginning and began rewatching what I had seen before, and then watching what I had not seen for the first time. So this latest viewing of Iron Fist Season 1, the problems of this season jumped out at me even more than they did the first time that I saw this season. But what jumped out at me even more was how easily some of these problems could have been fixed. And no, this does not mean that I will be taking a stab at fixing all of the Marvel Netflix stuff. It would take me hundreds of hours to rewatch all of this, and I don't have a hot take on each season, so consider this a done in one. The first thing we do, Danny's father came from Kunlun and chose to leave and attempted to return, which leads to Daddy and Mommy dying when Danny is a child. So when Season 1 first dropped, I remember a lot of people hating on the series and the character because he's a white guy usurping Chinese culture and coming in to save the day. There were comparisons made to James Cameron's Avatar or the Matt Damon movie The Great Wall. I've heard this called Mighty Whitey or the White Savior Syndrome, and I can see how some people would see this as problematic. Personally, I didn't have much of an issue with it because, well, when you have the White Savior Syndrome, generally they're supposed to save somebody, right? Danny didn't do much of that in this series. In fact, he's the biggest failure in the history of fiction. His one job is to protect Kunlun, and spoilers, he doesn't. Or maybe Kunlun is still out there somewhere. Madame Gao kinda hinted at that in Defenders, but then in Iron Fist Season 2, everyone is back to thinking Kunlun has been destroyed, so I don't even know. Even when Danny comes to New York, he doesn't get much else right either. But as far as the cultural appropriation thing, while it didn't really bother me, I can see why other people didn't like it. I saw other people saying that if you turn Danny into an Asian character, that it turns him into a different kind of character. Not necessarily that it ruins the character, but it does something different than what was done in the comics. So this idea came to me when I was reading the Iron Fist Return of Kunlun trade paperback. It collects pretty much all of Danny's solo adventures from the 1990s, and the very first issue in the book, really my intro to Iron Fist outside of the Netflix universe, was Uncanny Origins issue 14, written by Colleen Wing with art by MC Wyman and Ralph Cabrera. And in this issue, when Danny is about to leave Kunlun to get revenge for the death of his parents, more on that later, UT, who was kind of like the guy in charge of Kunlun, he tells Danny that Wendell Rand was his brother. Now this was later retconned a couple of times. We find out there are multiple UTs, and since they all wear the same mask and some of them are untrustworthy, I could never figure out if this one who told Danny this was telling the truth or not, even in the context of that issue. But by the time you got to Ed Brubaker and Matt Fraction's run on the series, Wendell Rand was not related, at least by blood, to anyone in Kunlun, and was an outsider just as much as Danny. So maybe UT meant that Wendell was like a brother from another mother. But back to fixing Iron Fist Season 1. What if we use this bit from Uncanny Origins and say that Wendell is originally born and raised in Kunlun, and for whatever reason, he was restless and he wanted to leave and explore the outside world, possibly against orders, but he did it anyway. He married an American lady, and then by the time Danny was a kid and the portal to Kunlun opens back up, he wants to take his family there and show them how amazing it is, but he probably doesn't want to stay. He just wants to visit. Then Wendell and Heather die, and Danny is taken in by the monks at Kunlun, and the rest is pretty much like it was in the show. I do believe this would come pretty close to fixing all of the problems that people had, while also sticking pretty close to the source material. And hey, you can even use a bit of the comic book continuity that I actually liked that was almost immediately discarded. The next thing we change is a little more drastic. We spend less time on the Harold Meacham subplot. Danny should know from episode 1 that Harold was responsible for the death of his parents and is trying to legally find a way to dethrone Harold and get justice for his parents. This also means that in my fix, Harold did not fake his death and is running Rand with Ward and Joy working under him. Not to keep coming back to this is how they did it in the comics, but this is kind of how they did it in the comics. At least the part where Danny knows that Harold killed his dad, because in the couple of versions of the origin I have seen, Danny saw it happen. It wasn't a mysterious plane wreck like in the show. If you do it this way, then maybe Ward immediately teams up with Danny, at first because he wants more control of the company with Dad out of the way, and then eventually he sees that Harold is corrupt and his reason for teaming up with Danny becomes a little more heroic. Joy would likely ally with Harold against Danny, and she could become more antagonistic throughout Season 1. As is, when you just watch Season 1, it seems the series wanted her to eventually become a villain or antagonist in Season 2, but didn't quite know how to get there. So she 100% knows that her dad was corrupt and villainous, but is still really upset at Danny when Harold dies for good. On the one hand, it makes sense because she lost her dad, gets him back, and then immediately loses him again. But the execution still makes her look really dumb when she's willing to blame Danny for stuff she knows her dad was doing. If we did it this way, with Harold never faking his death and Joy being on his side as soon as Danny comes back and accuses him of murder, she could be more ignorant of his villainy and would have a legitimate reason to hate Danny, as he would actually be tearing her family apart, which is what she accepts that he did when she and Davos speak at the end of the season 1 finale. Also, doing this, Ward becomes less of a flip-floppy character. I actually liked Ward in the series, at least I did once Dany was fully back in the company. But it's still pretty problematic when the season ends with him wanting to be friends with Dany and run the company with him, but this is the guy who sent a couple of people to kill Dany as soon as he found out who he was. The show wants us to forget that because Ward is being psychologically abused by his dad. And sure, that's sad, but stop acting like Ward is such a white knight. Instead, let's let him actually be more of a white knight from day one. Sure, he can still be a rude, manipulative anus with many of the same motivations that he had in the series that we got. He wants to keep and or gain control of the company. But this way, his character arc can feel less forced than what it was in the series that we got. In this rewrite, since Harold never died, he needs a different reason for being allied with the Hand than what we got in the series. With what we actually got, it makes sense why Harold wants to use Dany. He wants the Hand out of his life so that he can take back the company. But it never made any sense why the Hand needed Harold alive in the first place. They've already infiltrated Rand, and if they need anything from the company, why not go to Ward or Joy, who are publicly running the place? Threaten to kill someone close to them, offer them more money or power, whatever it takes. There's no reason for the Hand to keep Harold alive other than for dramatic weight in the narrative. So in my rewrite, Harold is still allied with the Hand, I guess, since we need to be setting up stuff in Defenders, like all the other Netflix shows we're doing, and Harold can be the one spearheading the heroin production from within the company, instead of Madame Gao coming to the company to check up on that, since it seems she would have much more important things to take care of. This would kinda go hand in hand, no pun intended, with Dany knowing about Harold from the beginning, but get rid of all the corporate warfare. There's like 5 episodes of Dany trying to get his company back out of a 13-episode season. You know why we don't spend an hour of Batman Begins on Bruce trying to get his company back after he's been gone so long? Because it's boring! So boring! When I first watched Daredevil Season 1, I thought it was great because it felt like a superhero movie that was 13 hours long instead of 2 hours long. And being that long, they were able to fully explore every bit of the story they wanted to explore. Nothing felt rushed. They had as much time as they needed. And honestly, that could have still been true for this season. They just needed to rearrange the pieces a little bit. Instead of spending 5 hours on Dany trying to get his company back, maybe spend 2 episodes at the most. And then, since this is supposed to be a martial arts superhero, maybe let him do some more of that stuff, which is at least kind of cool to watch, unlike the boardroom drama. So if I greatly reduce the amount of time it takes to have Dany reclaim the company, then that would impact how and why he meets Colleen Wing. I liked Colleen in this season, but I didn't like the way the season shoves Dany and Colleen into each other, and then it just keeps happening. The only reason that she's in his life is because she's literally the only person in the city that he has met since his return from Kunlun, other than that guy who overdosed in the park. And he needs an ally, so he goes to the woman who tried to give him money in the park. And spoilers, when we find out that she is a member of the Hand, that chance meeting becomes especially contrived. Now, I actually like that Colleen is a member of the Hand, and the idea that the Hand has splintered into at least 2 factions. I like that the group that Colleen belongs to indoctrinates their recruits into believing that they are the good guys, while Gao and her group have no illusions about what they are doing. Granted, it makes absolutely zero sense when you get to the Defenders, and Bakudo and Gao are cool with each other, but that's a topic for another time. In Iron Fist, though, I thought all of that was pretty cool, but it is just super silly that Colleen just happens to meet this guy who ends up being exactly who her boss wants for his own nefarious plans. So I would fix this by having Dany do some television interview where he tells the world his story. His parents die, he was raised by monks, and he became the Iron Fist. Colleen and Bakudo see this on TV, so a plan is formed that she will insert herself into Dany's life. Then her character arc more or less progresses the way it did in Season 1. She starts to have genuine feelings for Dany, then she starts to see the Hand for what it really is, as Dany finds out who she is working for, then she leaves and joins Dany as an opponent of the Hand. So how does Colleen meet Dany? Maybe after Dany is in the company, he is trying to clean up Harold's mess and tracks down a shipment of drugs. Bakudo somehow knows about this, sends Colleen to conveniently be there to fight the Hand members who Gao and Harold had guarding the drugs. Colleen and Dany have their meet cute, then it's pretty much like it was in the show. Less of homeless Dany constantly pestering Colleen, less of him trying to tell her how to run her dojo, and then just buying the building when she adamantly does not want that. This makes Dany less pushy, and Colleen a little bit more proactive at the beginning. Honestly, that's about all I would do. This might actually shrink the plot of the whole season down quite a bit, but I'm okay with that. Other than Daredevil Season 1, I think most of the Marvel Netflix shows could have been trimmed down in varying degrees. I don't think they had to stick to the 13-episode seasons just because that's how long Daredevil Season 1 was. Iron Fist Season 2 was only 10 episodes, so this was an option for other seasons, it seems. This could have been a 6-episode season using the changes I suggested here, and it would have been a much more enjoyable series in my humble. Anyway, that's all I have for this rewrite. I hope you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back next week with something even more different than what I did this week. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.